introduce our next speaker. So here, our next speaker is Umar from the UK. So he is a developer that has created a ton of courses and tutorials and workshops on developer tooling. And developer tooling is something that I am very bad at. So I've been really looking forward to this talk. I'm hoping there's going to be some useful tips for me here. I mostly don't feel like a proper developer. It took me about 3 years to learn even the most basic shortcuts in VS Code. So I'm in awe of people that do have those skills. So please welcome Umar to the stage.
Hey everyone, thank you. I'm really grateful to be here. This is my talk, Modern CSS Development, Tooling and Workflows, where I cover some hopefully lesser-known tools that you didn't already know about, or maybe you've heard of, and now is the time you have an excuse to get started. We've got a lot of topics, so I'm not going to spend too long about me, but those are my URLs. If you want to give me any feedback, ask any questions, maybe you hear of a tool and you're like, oh no, I forgot what it was, so please do ask questions. I'm more than happy to write stuff up if people want to learn more about this. A lot of topics, as I mentioned, code snippets, AI tools, editor, tips and tricks, dev tool stuff, performance visual testing. So I'm going to be very brief on each section, but hopefully it's just enough to like name drop, like, oh, hey, like go and check this out. Hopefully it's just enough that you can get some value on it. And the theme here is lesser known tools. That's the common theme here. Like, for example, prettier styling. I think that's incredibly valuable, but I also think it's quite mainstream, and most of us know about linters and formatters, so I'm not really going to talk about that. And also, a lot of this is not unique to CSS. I, of course, will be presenting it with a CSS use case, but it's not unique to CSS, and I think that's a good thing. Hopefully it applies to just front-end development in general. Let's get started straight into it. What do I mean by CSS snippets? Well, if you think about that classic box sizing reset, that could be an example of one snippet, and yeah, I want to talk a bit about how I use snippets and how you might get started with that too. I'll talk about VS Code because I believe it to be one of the most popular out there editors right now for front-end developers. And throughout the whole of this talk, if you use something else like IntelliJ Sublime, do a little web search, so Sublime Text, snippets. I promise you it's all there for other editors and other platforms. Let's get started. Command-Shift-P in VS Code, select Configure User Snippets, and you can customize a CSS JSON file, so it will only present those snippets in your style sheets. And it looks a little like this. I know the syntax is maybe a little funny. By the way, you can ask these language model tools, all this new AI stuff, to generate that for you, so that's pretty nice. So here, my trigger is grid-container. So when I type grid-container, it will produce display grid, but that mapping doesn't really make sense. I'm not saving many characters, so you might want to turn that into something a little more substantial, like this. You're probably seeing some funny syntax. What's the dollar symbol about and the 1:3? Well, that's a tab stop index. Every time you hit tab, it's going to jump to the 1, then the 2, then the 3, and the digit to the right of the colon over there, that's just the value that exists by default. It just happens to be a digit in this case. Probably easier to show a video. OK, so I type in grid-container, which is my little snippet, and there we go. Every time I hit tab, it jumps to one of those tab stop indexes. And that's pretty much it. I do want to present another quick use case for why you might want to use this, and that use case is around education. Unlike some of the other very talented speakers here, I struggle to keep up to date. I really do. And when I'm in the flow, when I'm in my development workflow, I can't just stop what I'm doing and go and read a blog post, an announcement post, a tutorial. And not to cast shade onto anyone who writes tutorials, I do myself, as has been mentioned, but I kind of want to stay in my editor. So what I'll do is I'll take a new CSS feature like the range media queries, and I'll chuck that into a snippet. And therefore, when I think about it, I can very quickly just get the code that I need. I don't need to read all about the backstory. And I'm also showing here the ability to use predefined or predefined values, which is quite nice. So that's another feature. Go and read the documentation for how to do that. I think it's comma-separated values to getting a predefined list. So that shows CSS nesting and media range syntax, very useful for me. Let's move on. So that was snippets with code editors? What about snippets in your operating system in general? To do that, we get some text expansion software. I use Alfred. I'm not going to necessarily advocate for it because it is a paid tool, or it's a paid feature, rather. So I will name drop a few open source tools in a second. But in Alfred, you have a keyword, so that's the trigger, and I've called mine box reset, one word, lowercase, and there's the snippet that you can see. It's the classing box sizing reset. So I go into my browser. This is a browser, even I've hidden the Chrome frame, and this is StackBlitz. StackBlitz has no idea about my VS Code snippet, so this is where text expansion tooling can be very, very useful. And think about all the places you write CSS online. I write it in JSBin, CodePen, CodeSpaces, like GitHub issues, so these snippets can be useful at times. Very quick summary, feel free to take a picture or just wait for the slides to get published. But I'm just very going to quickly recommend you use Espanto. If you're in two minds about this and you're not too sure if you want to spend money, just use Espanto. It's free, it's open source, and it has a very good collection of existing front-end snippets that you can get started with. Okay? Let's move on to AI stuff. I'm going to try and keep it tasteful because I'm pretty sure we're all getting quite overwhelmed with this stuff, or at least I am. And I'll try and keep within the spirit of lesser-known tools. However, I want to get us all on a level playing field. I don't want to assume that maybe everyone knows, because maybe some of you don't. So just a heads up, you can go into these tools like ChatGPT, Bard, Find with a PH, Perplexity. You can go into these tools and give it little queries or statements and say, convert these to use logical CSS properties. And you feed it your old traditional code base, and then it will convert it into the new goodness, the new best practices. And for discrete tasks like that, it tends to work very well. However, don't be that person that just copies and pastes it into their code base. Same with Stack Overflow, same with whatever, a gist. Don't just copy and paste code. You need to be very mindful about performance, accessibility, and so on. Just to give you another quick example, not out of principle, I just don't use utility classes almost ever. I tend to like vanilla or handwrite everything. So convert these utility classes to use more semantically named classes. Semantic in air quotes, because I know that's a very subjective term. But here's a bunch of markup that is using utility classes, and it does a decent job. At least in my tests, it did a decent job at converting that. And you can do the same with JSX. Again, something I don't use, not out of principle, just because it's a personal preference. So it does a pretty good job with that. But let's move on to the whole thing about like lesser known tools. I don't want to just talk about mainstream stuff. AI with your code base, so think about you having this entire repository where you might want to do a bit of question and answering with that. I will cherry pick one tool. There are many, and like day by day more are being announced, and I'm like, ooh, should I be updating my slides to reflect this? I haven't. But Bloop is one of those tools. It's free for individuals, bloop.ai, so go and check it out. And it works very well with vague questions, and that's why I wanted to present it, because I think it's quite exciting. Ignore what my old web app did. I did this for a coding challenge a very long time ago. It's irrelevant what it does. It's a postcode checker. But the part I want you to pay attention to is that submit button. It's the browser's default submit button. So I download Bloop. It's a desktop application for Mac and Windows, and it gives me a little Q&A interface. And then I'll say, I was going to say I asked the question, but this isn't even a question. This is just a statement. I just say the submit button looks boring. It does a decent job at sort of interpreting that I want to spice it up a little. So it gives me some CSS. It knows the context of the CSS file. And by the way, in my tests, I did two things. I reset the context each time, like I wiped my repository from the application, just to make sure it's not benefiting from some historical test that I did. So it does work pretty well. And also, I never give it clues as to what file I'm talking about. I just give vague statements like the submit button. And keep in mind, this repository that I'm testing has Markdown, unit tests, server-side code. So I was pretty impressed that it understood what is meant by submit button. We apply that CSS, I reload the page, and you get a very subtle fade-in transition, which is, I don't know, it's subtle, and I like subtle, and it color matches the button with the text. So that's nice. When I hover over the submit button, add a wiggle animation. Please don't use AI just to add animations all over the place. That's a future that nobody wants. But it works. It generates the CSS keyframe animations. I can then ask a follow-up question, like, make the animation stop after 1 second. And it does that, animation-iteration-count, so that's good. And then finally, I say, what file do I add this in? Very nice. So there you go. Again, it's a bit gimmicky, I know, but yeah. A little note, I'm testing this on a very simple repository. I've also tried this on, like, I wouldn't say complex, but more heavy-handed repositories that use like JSX, Tailwind, and it was able to like follow the existing patterns of code. And so the code it told me to add always followed the existing patterns, and I thought that was very, very good. There are a lot of tools in this space. One of those tools is even an official like not official, like a registered ChatGPT plugin that you can now access from ChatGPT. I have not found much luck with a lot of these, surprisingly. However, with Copilot and Bloop, or I should say Copilot Chat and Bloop, have found a bit of luck. Copilot Chat, I put an asterisk. 1, because it's a paid tool, so just be aware of that. And 2, because you had to give it a bit of context. Maybe it was the way I was doing it, maybe I was doing something wrong, but I had to kind of suggest like, oh, the submit button, check the file that I've got open, and then it kind of understood. But Bloop has so far been the only tool where you just ask these vague questions, no files open, and it just kind of infers what you are asking about. Let's move on to Copilot. I'm going to assume most people here are familiar with it. Maybe you're using it in your job. So just to get us on that level playing field, again, if you give it a selector, like .sticky header, and press tab, it will give you this ghost text where it kind of suggests the most likely properties and values that you want to fulfill the selector that you've provided. So that's one nice feature, but this is kind of unsurprising. In my mind, this is like quite well known nowadays. Maybe slightly lesser known is there is Copilot Chat, which is a complementary extension. Yeah, go and check it out, where you kind of get this interactive chat editor, and you can type in stuff, and it has context over what file you're in and what piece of code that you're in. And there I just said like header, sidebar, main area, footer. And I didn't really make a request. I just said CSS grid, whatever that means. And it does a decent job. I had to get rid of a few extra braces there, but it does a decent job at that. And there's the grid template area. So yeah, I thought that was cool. OK, this is, again, maybe in the spirit of lesser-known tools. Maybe I'll show this idea of coding with your voice, like can we write CSS with our voice? Now there's 2 extremes when it comes to coding with voice. One side of the spectrum, if you like, is getting very specific with terminology, which I can't do. I can't pull that off. My brain just doesn't work like that. You know, it's the one where you say like new selector, logo, open brace, new property, color, colon, red, semicolon, and like my brain doesn't work that way, and I very much struggle to use tools like that. On the other extreme is the ability to say, make me a button, and we kind of know that works. And those two aren't interesting to me. What's interesting is the in-between. It's the one where you can just kind of say, color red, width 100%, display flex. And I wanted to make a little experimental proof of concept to see if we can get that working. Little disclaimer. After I got this working, I clocked that, oh, this is like an official product that's coming, and it's called Copilot Voice. So it was announced. It doesn't seem available yet, so hey, I'm a bit justified in showing this stuff. So the gist of what I'm about to show, it's a pre-recorded video. I'm going to skim through it. The gist of what I'm going to do is get some random CSS. You'll have to trust me that it's truly random CSS, and I'm going to recite it. As I recite it, it's going to a speech-to-text program. You can use your built-in like Mac or Windows voice dictation. And I'm going to take that transcription and then chuck it into Copilot Chat and see if we can get some coding with voice going. This is using Whisper, the speech-to-text models from OpenAI.
Logo, width 120 pixels, height 120 pixels, padding 30 pixels, border radius 50%. Box shadow 0030 pixels, RGB 000/10%, background color white.
Okay, just going to pause on the transcription, just so you get a feel for what these Whisper models, or speech-to-text models rather, produce. So it's not syntactically accurate. So I would be impressed if these AI tools can make sense of that and turn that into CSS. In this case, it does. Let's quickly cross-reference. We got the width, we got the height, the padding, border radius, box shadow, it used 0.1 instead of 10%, whatever. Background color, fine. The only thing it messed up in is the selector, which it says the word .logo as opposed to the like symbol .logo. Anyway.
Change the width and height to 60 pixels. Make the padding 10%. Make the border radius 10 pixels. Change the box shadow color to black and make the background color indigo. Also add a logo hover class where the background color changes to a darker shade of indigo.
Okay, six changes there. There's my mouse. Okay, I'm not going to pause, but there's some transcription, and again, it does a decent job at that. It's changed the width, changed the height, the padding, box shadow color looking good, background color is indigo. It's added a brand new style rule, which is very cool. So yeah, the point of this was to say, can we code with voice? I think we have been able to do that. We can add CSS, we can edit. I'm going to now skip ahead just in the interest of time. So a quick summary. Rather than doing summaries at the end, I'm going to do it after kind of each section, hopefully. A quick summary, we saw ChatGPT and just the general idea of putting these prompts in where you say like, hey, convert this utility class into its whatever more semantically named equivalent. You saw Copilot, $10 a month, available for a number of editors. If you have Copilot, make sure you check out Copilot Chat, which is kind of nice. There's Bloop, which is question and answering against a repository. That's bloop.ai. And I've left a little alternative there, which is AIDER. That will use your GPT API key, so it's kind of paid in that sense, but it does the same thing as Bloop. And then finally, that whole like coding with CSS Voice, which, by the way, I've been forcing myself to use, and it works. Like, it works very nicely. It's a bit, my workflow personally is a bit clunky, but hey, it does a good job. If you're curious, now is not the time, but if you want to chat after or you want to message me, there's a way of getting that whole speech-to-text stuff working entirely locally. Like, I can't understate how significant this is for those of you who care about maybe money or you want to preserve your privacy, you don't want data to leave your machine. You can get all of that working locally with local large language models and local speech-to-text models. All of that is possible to get working locally. It's not as accurate, but it's accurate enough to get started. And I'd be more than happy to maybe write that up one day in terms of how I got that working. Whew, OK, editor tips and tricks. So moving on from AI, now talking about editors. Again, I'm showing VS Code because I believe it to be the most popular out there, but just search your editor of choice. Almost all of these features are available. This is sticky scroll. It's not groundbreaking by any means, but it makes a little difference. Command-Shift-P, toggle sticky scroll in VS Code. And now, when you go to a CSS file, it will fix the sort of the outer scope, if you like, the selector to the top of the viewport. And kind of like GPS, you know GPS on our phones that you use to navigate? I've become very reliant on this, and now when I don't have this, I'm like so lost. But this also works for HTML as well, which is very useful. You know the opening tag, you constantly lose it, you lose track of it. Also works for JavaScript, Markdown files, it's great. Expand region, again, available for all editors. Go and check it out, through different plugins, I should say. But in VS Code, it's called expand-region. And this is one of my most used editor plugins, along with another one, which I'm going to talk about in a few minutes. This is cool. So I bind the shortcut command and open quote, and it will do like these text selections, which are like semantic. So it expands, and it works beautifully for CSS. It expands your text selection to the contents of the parentheses, then the contents and the parentheses, and then the property value, and then the property and the value, and then it keeps like expanding. And you can also like shrink that text selection. You can do the opposite as well. Live preview, this is, if I were to frame it, based on what problem does it solve. If you are always, Control-Sing, Command-Sing, and then waiting for your page to reload, I know this isn't groundbreaking stuff, but still, you can install this official VS Code plugin called Live Preview, and then Command-Shift-P, start Live Preview, and then you get a little workflow that looks like this. You can go into your editor, into VS Code, you start changing stuff, and it reflects on the embedded web page in real time, so you don't need to, you don't need to reload. You don't even need to save the file. Okay, so that's quite nice. You're going to think that I'm like showing this, the next slide I'm talking about, you're going to think I'm showing this just to like be cool or like just to prove a point. I genuinely have used this in my like day-to-day workflows for certain projects where cross-browser testing was like imperative. And this was my setup where I had like all these browsers open, and I was like, changing CSS in real time, and it was reflecting everywhere. And I don't know if it's obvious. I don't know why I put it on the screen like that for the video, I guess. But that's a physical device. That's not something in the screen. That's a physical device resting on the laptop screen. And I wanted to show two things. One is the live preview thing works on mobile, which is nice. But two, you can browse localhost. And the feature that I use to get that working is called port forwarding. Don't have time time to get into the full, like, I'm not going to do a tutorial right now. Come and chat to me after, do a little search for port forwarding, and you'll find the instructions for how to get that working. An alternative, quite big on alternatives because I do appreciate not everyone might use VS Code. Browser sync is one option where it can kind of hook into your build system, your like whatever Webpack or parcel, whatever. It can hook into that and like inject special JavaScript which will like update the CSS as you update. And it doesn't even reload the page, which is kind of nice. It just sort of live injects the CSS that you save. Nice. Moving on. I don't know why, yeah, I've called this your editor, but everywhere. You can tell I'm really good at naming stuff. But yeah, this is an extension called Ghost Text, and it's available like for a bunch of editors, a bunch of plugins. Go and check it out. And the idea is that your editor communicates to the browser in terms of what CSS you're writing. And for example, I have VS Code on the left, JS Bin on the right. JS Bin is like a CodePen alternative. And as I type into VS Code, it gets injected into the page at real time. And you might be asking, why? Well, you get to keep all your editor shortcuts, your themes, your fonts, all the usual stuff you know in your editor. And as you can see, I'm pretty big with my productivity in my editor. You can keep that. And look, here I'm changing the VS Code color, and that injects. And at this point, you can actually hide the CSS pane in JS Bin and CodePen and StatBlitz and what have you. You don't even need it visible, so it's actually quite a nice development experience. And of course, this doesn't just work for CSS, it works for anything. You can write like Stack Overflow answers in your editor. It just syncs to the text area on the web page. All right, this is Jump to Destination. You might remember earlier I said that that's one of my most used plugins, and I was referring to whatever I was referring to earlier, but this is something different. So this competes for like top position in my books. I'm using Jumpy. There's tons of equivalents for your editor. You know, Ace Motion, yeah. Easy Motion, Ace Jump. Those are other terms in other editors that you might hear about. But yeah, the gist of it is it will overlay these abbreviations on your code, and those abbreviations are what you can type in to chuck the cursor to that position. And I think that's very, very useful for obvious reasons. This is how I navigate code. So I'm sure there's some hardcore like Vim people here who have like memorized all these shortcuts, and that's cool. Like more power to you. But I sometimes struggle to memorize all these new shortcuts, and I'm quite happy to be pushed information, and then I just tell the computer like I want that. I prefer this model. Very quickly, what it looks like. So I want to jump to text align center, the center specifically. So I hit my shortcut command semicolon. I got the little AU abbreviation, so I have to go to my keyboard, type in AU, and it puts the cursor there. So not groundbreaking, but just a small little development enhancement, if you like. A quick summary of what we just saw. We saw sticky scroll, we saw expand region, the structural selection thing, live preview, and Jumpy or Ace Jump or Easy Motion, whatever you want to call it, for jump to destination in your editor. All right, let's talk about DevTools stuff. Not a lot, just going to focus on a very particular aspect of DevTools. If you are interested, I try and document some of this stuff at umaar.com/dev-tips. Feel a bit weird plugging that because there are genuine DevTools experts here who have actual official documentation, and I'm kind of just plugging my own thing. But go to my website. I need the traffic more. So yeah, I mean the list of DevTools stuff is endless, from grid debugging to the container debugging that we saw earlier. It's endless. Seriously, I could do a whole workshop on it, and I have. And yeah, there's so much good stuff. But I'm only going to talk about features in regards to syncing or persisting of CSS changes. There's 3 features which are kind of pertinent to the notion of persisting your CSS, and I'm going to go over those 3 features, and then we're going to move on. So feature number 1 is a little experiment in the styles pane. So Command-Shift and P, and then Command-Shift-P, go to the experiments panel, and enable this little experiment. It's called Sync CSS Changes in the styles pane. This is not groundbreaking at all in the slightest, but I'm mentioning it because I have genuinely found it unexpectedly useful day to day. All it will do is the new CSS that you write in the styles pane, it highlights it green. That's it. That's all it does. However, if you're like me, you are constantly changing stuff in the styles pane, and you're like, also across different selectors, and you're like, damn, I've completely forgotten what I've changed. What on earth do I copy back into my editor? So this kind of helps with that. You can also Command-Shift-MP and go to the Changes panel, and this just kind of aggregates all those changes that you made, and it allows you to copy all changes, revert all the changes. You can, lots of little minor interactions. You can click on that, and then it takes you to the relevant point in the source code. Anyway, moving on, this feature is called Local Overrides. You go to the Sources panel, you enable the Overrides feature, and then you give it a folder on your desktop. For example, a folder in your Downloads folder. And then let's say you're on, like a banking website, and you have your balance, and you want to change it from minus 300 euros into 30 million euros, you can do that with local overrides because you can edit HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And so you can change all of that there. And this is nice. A few people have asked me already, like, when do you use this? What is this useful for? And I've got a pretty good use case that I find I use very often. If ever I have a performance fix in mind, and I'm not sure if this is the performance fix that I want to go with, I will use local overrides. So I apply my performance fix. I then, I record a performance profile, but then I can disable local overrides and go back to how it was originally, and then I record a new performance profile, and I can compare the two. And I think that's a really handy workflow, and I think it's a perfect use case for local overrides, to be honest. All right. Yeah, let's move on to the last feature in the kind of domain of persisting your CSS. This is called File System, so go to the Sources panel and add a folder to your workspace in the File System pane. And from there, what you want to do is you want to give it your actual source code repository. So if you're working on your website, give it your actual website code. And what this will do is, you've got DevTools on the left, you've got VS Code on the right, and you can start to edit in DevTools. So here I'm changing rotation just because it's easy to see, it's easy to demonstrate. And I'm changing that, and I don't need to touch my editor at all. And then at some point, in a second, I'm going to hit Command and S, and watch VS Code. Right? That rotation appears, so it's all in sync. And it's a really nice workflow because, don't know if this is clear, but you don't have to touch the editor at all. You go straight into your Git client or your Git terminal, whatever, and you just commit that change, and it's really great. And again, I've forced myself to use this for a few projects, and it's good. It can be temperamental at times of maybe source maps, but generally it's good, it works, and I really like it. A little pro tip for you. You can go through a whole full-stack development experience using what we just saw. So when you add a folder to your workspaces, DevTools presents to you the server-side code as well as the front end, or rather just the entire project. And so what I did is I started changing my TypeScript controllers, the back-end code. And then as I hit save in DevTools, that triggers the file watcher in my terminal to be like, oh, a change has been made, using Vite or Parcel or Gulp, Webpack, whatever you're using, and then it reloads the page. So you never actually touch your editor. You can change server-side code. You just have to hit that Command-S or Control-S. This is just an informal summary of what we just spoke about. So really what I'm trying to highlight in this table is that Workspaces kind of does all the things. Whereas local overrides, it does persist to disk, but it doesn't persist to your actual source code, your actual source repository. Cool. This is a little bonus, a quick detour. It's a nice little workflow that you can use in DevTools. It's not specific to DevTools. However, the application that I'm about to show, the one place that I use this application the most is within DevTools. So I'm a big fan of my keyboard, as you probably gathered by now. And it turns out that that jumpy extension that I showed earlier, that was unique to the code editor, it's available for just the general operating system. And it's really nice because it works in DevTools. I don't fully understand how. DevTools is a web app, but somehow it's able to pick out the relevant parts of of DevTools so that I can navigate to it very quickly. So in this quick video, I want to jump to the #FFF, where it says background FFF. So the abbreviation is DG. So I'm going to type in DG in the keyboard. It places the cursor right there. I hit enter. So in 3, 4 keystrokes, I've been able to get to exactly where I want. I should do I'm not trying to cast shade and trying to paint DevTools out to be not keyboard navigable. They are extremely keyboard navigable. You can totally tab to your heart's content to do the equivalent, but this is an alternative option if you're into that. It also works in the sources panel, and for maybe the skeptics amongst you, maybe you're saying, Umar, if you're going to like have to stare at all these abbreviations, why don't you just learn the relevant shortcuts for the application that you're using? Well, here I'm not typing in any abbreviation. I'm typing in the word. This is like Command F on steroids. Like I want to jump to width, so I type in width, and somehow it does a full text search on everything in my page, and I can just jump to that. Keyboard only. Works just as expected, and it highlights the word that it's found. Yeah, feel free to take a picture or wait for the slides, but a quick summary is I'm using Shortcut, so the application I just showed in the video is Shortcut. If you're not so sure about this and you just want to have a quick play around, maybe go on Mac, go for Scoot, which is open source. On Windows, go for Hunt and Peck, which is open source. Okay, and yeah, you can try these things out. Oh, and by the way, if you want to, like after this talk, if you want to search for this, search for the tool name and then the platform, and that will guarantee you find it in like the search results. Okay, moving on to CSS performance tooling. You might be saying like that's a bit of a jump. We've gone from like editor tips and tricks to like dev tools and then performance tooling. I know like it's a bit of a pick and mix, not in a random sense. These aren't a random bunch of topics. These are all pertinent to CSS, of course. But again, this is all within the spirit of lesser known tools. Okay, all I'm going to talk about here is getting coverage information and performance testing with Lighthouse. Let's get into it. CSS coverage. Now, I don't want to talk about the panel, because you might already know that you can go into DevTools, you can hit Command, Shift, and P, and you get this coverage panel. And that coverage panel will tell you, here is the unused CSS or JavaScript in your web page. But that's not what we're here to talk about. What I would kind of like to mention to you is that you can do this in code. You can do this programmatically. And this is very useful for making sure you don't introduce regressions into your code base. So here, again, go and search for this stuff. This isn't, like, don't memorize the syntax, of course. But the gist of it is you start CSS coverage, you go to the page, and then you stop CSS coverage. That's like the traditional way of doing it. And then you calculate what your unused CSS percentage is. However, a little pro tip for you, and this is something I don't see done as often, and I think we do need to start doing this. Interact with the page in between that starting and stopping of the CSS coverage. Like interact. Do the thing that your users are most likely to do when they first land on the page, because I put it to you, I'm speaking as a lawyer for some reason, I put it to you that you know, if your unused CSS is still unreasonably high, even after you've interacted with the page, I don't think that's a good experience. And I would maybe use that as a trigger to, yeah, hey, we need to fix this. I don't suggest that you start introducing process.exit. What I'm trying to illustrate to you is that it's fairly trivial. If you don't have any infrastructure, it's fairly trivial to write a little Node.js script or generate this using some of the tools that we've seen, and just have a process.exit, and then combine that with a GitHub action or a CI tool of your choice, and that will fail the build. And this is like just a little nice way to get started. Of course, in reality, you're probably using some sort of test runner, and that can handle the failing of tests for you. But this is just to illustrate a quick example. Let's talk about Lighthouse. Lighthouse is, you know, for those who don't know, it's a little panel in the DevTools where you Command-Shift-P, you go to the Lighthouse panel, and it will give you a bunch of nice recommendations for your page. It will tell you, you've got render blocking resources, or you have to enable text compression. You can run this in on the command line. You can run npx Lighthouse website name, and it will generate a little report, and you can upload that report to a service of some sort. And now, every time you or your team commits code, you can like now browse these little reports. And I think that's nice. You can also use GitHub Actions. I think they have a feature for this. I forget the name. It's something like artifacts or like test output, where you can basically go into GitHub and see the Lighthouse report. Anyway, so this is like step one. But if you're going to go to all this effort to do that, then why not just set up the actual dashboard? So it turns out Lighthouse has a huge like ecosystem of free tools behind it. And there's this dashboard, which is great. It's really quick to use, and it will tell you, it will give you kind of, over time, here's how your web page has been performing. And of course, a lot of these metrics are very pertinent to CSS. They can, of course, be impacted by JavaScript as well, but you know, I'm presenting it with more of a CSS use case. It's also got a comparison report, so given one build and maybe the previous build, you can see, are you getting worse over time? Do we need to fix this? To run that server, this is not a joke, it's this command, it's npx lhci server, and that will just start up that server. And if you run that on your existing cloud infrastructure, I got it working for free on fly.io and Superbase for the database. You can just start a server like in like one terminal command. You do have to add a few flags to like specify the database, but yeah, you get the gist of it. And finally, you want to come back to your machine after you've started that server, and then you can like run a Lighthouse, like generate a Lighthouse report. But this command is a little different. What this will do is it'll upload that report to the server that you started, okay? And then when you combine that, you get the dashboard. And of course, you can chuck this in your GitHub Actions file, and now all of a sudden, every time you commit, you get this nice like timeline to see, are we getting worse, are we getting better over time? A little query to search after the conference, search for LHCI assertions. Assertions are a nice way of failing the build if you exceed certain thresholds. So here, we've got render blocking resources. Maybe I am guilty of adding too much CSS into my main blocking CSS file, and I want to make sure that I catch that in an automated way. So you can do that with the assertions feature. And the crux of what I'm trying to show, like the whole point of going through all of this hassle is for this, really. It's the idea of having your CI tool inform you, like, hey, no, I'm not going to allow this pull request to pass because you need to pass the Lighthouse thresholds that you've specified. Okay, so that's really the crux of what I was trying to show. Nice. A quick recap of what we just saw in that section. We saw CSS coverage with DevTools, Puppeteer, Playwright. Sorry, we didn't see it in Puppeteer, but it's also possible in Puppeteer. We saw Lighthouse with DevTools, but also CI, which is maybe the more exciting part. And then using GitHub Actions, which kind of encompasses those two features. All right, let's move on to visual testing. This year alone, the amount of regressions that I've seen, like on really popular websites, is wild. Like, it was shocking. And I don't think 2023 is particularly unique. I'm just saying in terms of what I observed this year. And a lot of these, I have a lot of empathy for these visual regressions because a lot of these, I'm like, how do you even test that? When an image breaks, in my end-to-end test, typically I would say assert that the image exists. But here the image does exist. The problem is the contents of the image. And there's lots of little quirks like this all over the web that I'm sure you see day to day. So automated visual regression testing can help in this regard. It basically involves taking a baseline screenshot of the working state, the happy path, and then every commit, every pull request, you take more screenshots, and then you compare the two. And then maybe you ask for human intervention, and a human has to say, it's true there's a diff, but that's an expected diff. Or the human has to say, no, that's unexpected. Let's move on. In this section, we're going to talk about a DIY approach with Playwright, a little visual testing dashboard, and an example of what it looks like if you really start to flesh out these DIY approaches. We'll take a look at a cloud-hosted solution. What happens if you pay money? Is the experience any better? And then we'll finish up with a few lessons learned. This is DIY with Playwright, do it yourself with Playwright. So you take your existing Playwright test, your existing end-to-end test, and in there, all you have to do is chuck a little assertion, do your little expectation, and all you have to say is await page.screenshot to match snapshot. You can pass a test name in there. You can pass thresholds in there, so maybe it won't fail if the pixel changes are very subtle. And just that little bit of code alone will generate a diff for you, assuming that your web page has changed. And these diffs get dumped to your file system, and that's a start, right? It's still a bit again, it has that DIY feeling. It's a bit frustrating you have to go into your build artifacts and look at these little files. So it would be nice if there was a dashboard that could encompass all of this, a website that you go to. Wikipedia have one. They've open sourced one recently, and it looks really nice. The dashboard looks a little like this, where it kind of gives you the diff and it gives you a scrubber. I really like this example because this is the reality. Visual testers amongst you will know that this is the reality of visual testing. The border increased by a pixel, but it displaced everything on the page, and the result is everything shows as a diff. I'm going to zoom in a second, and you can see it's ever so subtle, but that very subtle change caused everything to fail. This is what the Wikipedia dashboard looks like. It's unlucky, but again, it is the reality of visual testing. Until our tools improve, this is the reality. Loads of stuff is going to fail, and you're going to be left stumped because you're trying to figure out what is it that actually failed. And sometimes it really is just a 1 pixel border increasing. They've open sourced their dashboard, GitHub/Wikimedia/Pixel, so you can check that out. And I have no affiliation to any of these tools in the entire talk, including Applitools. I'm just mentioning it as one example. It is a paid tool. They do have a free tier, and it's very easy to stay within that free tier, in my opinion. But here's an example. So I've taken my website, I've increased the font size of a button at the top of that page, and that displaced everything. And again, it is a nightmare coming on like a Monday morning to work, and you have to look at this, and it's like, oh, but where do I even get started? Everything is showing as a diff. I don't really know what went wrong. So a lot of these cloud tools nowadays, they have features to help with this. They know it's a very common problem. This cloud tool has a feature called hide diffs caused by element displacement. You toggle it, and it will hide basically everything below that button. It kind of figures out what diffs have been caused by a displacement, and it will hide all of that. So that's quite nice. One other feature I was very pleasantly surprised by is root cause analysis, where given a diff, it can show you the corresponding CSS which triggered that. And I think that this is kind of powerful. I really wish that these arrive in, with the open source tools that I've mentioned, because that would make for a much more compelling use case to maybe stick with free, stick with open source, and stick with that community spirit. All right, to finish off, let's just, we'll go through some visual testing tips. These are some things that I've learned over the years, and I'm just going to kind of breeze past it because this isn't a visual testing talk. This is just one small topic. Okay, if your dynamic content keeps changing, you can set up exclusion zones. Just search for it. Again, pretty much every tool offers the ability to mark a region of the page as excluded. So if a diff appears in that area, it will still allow you to pass. Personally, I think that's a bit, I'm not 100% on that, so I would mock data instead. I think mocking data is a bit more, turn that dynamic data into static data, and that feels a little bit more reliable. If you're getting loads of false positives, you can apply thresholds, and thresholds are if the diff exceeds this amount, then yes, fail the build. Otherwise, we allow it. We trust that it's something subtle, like font aliasing or a slight browser quirk. If you're, isolated component testing, that's a whole thing in its own regard. I think that's quite a good thing to have a look, where you're just visual testing components in isolation. And yesterday a question was asked who's using components, and I think a lot of us are now, so this is a very helpful thing to do. If the build is constantly failing because of diffs, maybe the biggest advice I would give to a team in that case is promote to production anyway. Don't fail the build, but collect the diffs, collect it, and then have a sort of whatever, retrospective, whatever you want to call it, just evaluate it later and ask the question, was it catching out real failures, or have we maybe chosen the wrong tool for the job? So evaluate its usefulness, or reevaluate, I should say. A quick recap of what we just saw. We saw snapshot testing, more DIY approach. With Playwright, it's also available for Selenium, Puppeteer, Cypress. We saw some dashboards. The Wikimedia Pixel example and Backstop.js is another very popular one. And there's a lot of these cloud-based solutions. Go and check them out. One is called Applitools, which we saw. Percy is another very popular one. I really appreciate your time, and I'd be more than happy for you to give any feedback or ask any questions. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Umar. If you'd like to make your way over. Well, thank you for that. That was absolutely packed with useful tips, which I will definitely be investigating later on. I learned a lot from that, so thank you. We do have quite a few questions for you, so we'll try and get through some of these. The first one is, do you know if there are any AI tools that can make documentation easier for developers?
Yeah, sure. There are lots of tools that can make documentation easier. Again, GitHub is a pretty big player in this space, or Microsoft, yeah, but there are definitely tools, paid, open source, they already exist, so search for documentation GPT. I can't remember the names off the top of my head, but they do exist, and they will do things like index your entire repository, find out what documentation is missing, try and substitute it with what is missing. It can analyze pull requests as well and write the pull requests for that, and that's pretty nice. But yeah, I can't remember the tools off the top of my head, but if you search for it, the field out there is endless right now.
Yeah, that seems really useful because it seems like documentation is one of those things that we all should do better, and developers don't seem to get around to that as often as we should. And the same with unit tests. Actually, my colleague swears by ChatGPT for unit testing because nobody wants to be writing out unit tests for hours at a time. So that seems a pretty good use case. So the next question is. Oh, it's actually from me, sorry. I think another question got deleted. So I can see there'll be some advantages, or a lot of advantages using, all of the tools you mentioned, but AI in particular is one of them in making code more accessible, or making coding more accessible to people who don't necessarily have as much familiarity as we do. But do you see any disadvantages to an over-reliance on these tools?
Yeah, I can see, is this on? Yeah, I can see an over-reliance, no?
Oh, we seem to have lost audio.
Oh, no. Yeah, is that okay now? Oh, phew. Okay. Yeah, I can see an over-reliance for sure, depending on this stuff, and kind of ignoring some of the more foundational concepts that we learned as web developers way back in the days, like performance, accessibility, being semantic. I can see a future where people are just trusting that the tool is going to give you that for free, and then they'll just be like, it's going to be accurate, right? It's the most combined, the code that it's providing to me is surely it's the most whatever upvoted thing that was out there, and that's why it's presenting it to me. I trust that it will work. But I've seen lots of examples already, including in my testing for this talk, where the solutions were not accessible, they were not performant, they were not up to date with modern web standards, which is maybe that one is to be expected, but to not be accessible and then to copy and paste, that's not a good future to be in. So I'd recommend having that foundational knowledge, knowing how to do all of this stuff from scratch. Even that might make me sound like a dinosaur, but when you have that foundational knowledge, you're able to use your experience and that knowledge to be like, that's not how I would do it. I'm going to now step in. And that's truly treating the tool like a copilot, which is what it's called, right? And then you're the main driver. And I think that's how it should be.
Yeah, I can see what you mean. I mean, I guess we already have that problem. So many people just copy and paste from Stack Overflow, but this seems like it could potentially compound that. So I feel like a bit of a dinosaur sometimes, being a bit hesitant to use these tools. But I think, that for better or worse, they're here to stay. And there are some clear advantages as well. I remember, I think it was Josh Como published a blog post a while ago, because he has some motor condition, mobility issue, which means he can't actually write code for a long time on a keyboard, and uses voice dictation for most of his coding. So it was really interesting to watch you do that and see how accurate it can be. So there are obviously huge accessibility advantages there, I guess, seeing how tooling has developed.
Yeah, exactly. I was just talking about it from a convenience perspective, but from an accessibility, it's a big deal. And shout out to Josh. I did use that post as inspiration for this.
Awesome. So the next question is, regarding snippets, have you used the DevTools snippets, which I guess is a package in VS Code, possibly? And if so, do you know of a page that has a collection of commonly used snippets? So I think he's saying that technically these are JavaScript snippets, but they can inject CSS.
Right, yeah, so there's a feature in DevTools, I think it's Sources Panel and Snippets, where if you have a bunch of just like we saw, if you have these repeated bits of JavaScript that you want to type, or that you're applying to web pages, chuck it in a DevTools snippet, and then you can very quickly, it's kind of like bookmarklets. Think of it as a bookmarklet manager. That's kind of what it is. Yeah. And yeah, so the question was is there a collection of these? There definitely is. There are a few. There's a performance-related one, which is amazing. So search for DevTools snippets, performance, and you'll find it. There's an official, I say official, it's not official, but there is a DevTools snippets repository of just a bunch of very useful things that you can apply to pages. It tells you very interesting metrics about your code, about the web page, things related to accessibility as well. And yeah, they're easy to download and then paste it in. So search for DevTools snippets. It's on GitHub and you'll find it.
Very handy. And you mentioned components and testing components, visual regression testing components. How can we test CSS coverage for components? Can we do that in a way that is broken down to that component level?
Yeah, sorry, so give an example.
So you showed us the CSS coverage testing, so how you can test, I guess, how much of a page, how much unused CSS you have for a page. Can you do that at a component level?
That's interesting, how much unused CSS there is given a component, like kind of disregarding the outer context that it's in. Yes, it would need, I don't know of any out-of-the-box approaches. Is this kind of what like Storybook offers? But out of the box, I don't know, but you can definitely like set it up. You ultimately have a headless browser at your disposal, so Playwright or Puppeteer, and you can definitely like extract the component you need, chuck it into an empty page. You need to get all that relevant CSS with it. Hopefully that CSS is nicely self-contained within a CSS, within a style sheet. And then you chuck that in, and yes, in theory, you can absolutely do it. It's a risky game, though, because what if that component benefits from like styles in the outer context because of like inheritance? And I think it's risky, but it's definitely an interesting approach to go down. But you would have to set that up yourself, because I don't know of any tools that do it for you.
Yeah, that definitely seems a bit more complex. Hey?
Yeah.
Well, that's all we have time for, but there were definitely some more questions. So if you do have a question that we didn't get around to, please come and find Umar up at the help desk in the break. Thank you very much. Please give another round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you.